Hello and thank you so much for joining me for Saturday Night Crafting. Tonight we're going to work on the bokeh technique, which I've never done before, and it's really great fun, and I've got a whole bunch of simple easy ways for you to hopefully work with what you've got to create some beautiful cards and have a lot of fun. This video is in loving memory of my father-in-law, John, who we lost a couple weeks ago to dementia. His funeral was this past Wednesday, which is why you haven't seen me this week. My sister-in-law has set up a Just Giving page for the hospice, who's supported John until the very end. They survive purely on donations, so if you have a penny to give, please consider a donation. I have dropped the link in my description box below, so if you'd like to check it out, it's there for you. Let's get on to some funner, more uplifting crafting. Hopefully tonight I will have something that you've got in your stash that you can use to make this bokeh technique and have a really fun night. So these are the supplies I'm using tonight, and I'm going to kind of go through them with you. So we're going to do 4 ways to create a background for the bokeh technique. You can either use designer paper, which is like this paper pad here, a nice neutral paper pad with no patterns on it, just colors. The darker the color, the better. You want nice, really bright pigmented colors. So I guess not necessarily the darker the color, because I am using orange, yellow, and green with the distressings, but you really want a vibrant, deep saturated color for this bokeh technique to really stand out. So I've got inks, I've got paints, I've got explosion powders, and I'm going to work with some watercolor card. This is my favorite watercolor card. This is from Adhesive. You get quite a few sheets. You get 32 sheets in there, and I can get minimum 4 card panels out of each sheet. So you can really get quite a lot of cards with them. I will link everything I can down below in the description box if it's available. I'll pop it down there for you, and you can check it out if you want to. Getting started, I am cutting all my panels to be the exact same size as a card front panel, and later on I'll cut them down to what I want. So starting off, I am using my inks, and I'm just doing some simple ink blending. So I am blobbing on some ink colors, then I'm going in with my lightest colored sponge at the end and kind of blending all those colors together so it's not quite so blobby. It doesn't matter if it does look a bit blobby, because we're going to cover it up a bit with our bokeh technique. Now I did make 2 using this technique. I did one in blues, which is very subtle ink blending between these 2 colors, and I did the ones in the orange, yellow, and green. Now to use any explosion powder, so if you have got explosion powders like these ones I've got here from Pretty Gets Gritty, these are the Dirty Gritty, or if you've got brush shows, they will work great. I would avoid any of the ones that have the mica powder in them. So don't go with the sort of regular explosion powders or the Pixie Dust by Cosmic Shimmer. You want to go with ones that don't have mica, because you will really struggle to get your bokeh effect to work, and you'll struggle to stamp on it. So I'm just creating my backgrounds now and leaving them to dry. So the next one I'm going to do is with some watercolor paints. These are my gouaches from Arteza. I'll link them down below. They're fantastic. This is not even half a tube. This is about 1/3 of a tube, and they've been doing me for about 2 years, maybe 3. All I'm doing is saturating my cardstock, so I'm wetting the back of my watercolor card, and then I added quite a lot of water to the front, and I'm just allowing that ink to kind of run and blend between itself, and then at the end I spritzed it a bit more to get more of a watercolory effect, and I did leave it for a couple hours to dry, and then heat set it with my heat gun as well to make sure it was fully dry. So here are the 4 that I did. There's the watercolor paint, the gouaches. Here is the Pretty Gets Gritty explosion powder, the Dirty Gritty explosion powder, and then I've got my 2 inks there on the top right. So a quick and easy way to create a background. Hopefully you've got something in your stash that will work. Even children's paint will do, as long as it is water reactive. You can get a nice watery background, or use up that designer paper that you've got in your stash. Make use of it. The next thing we're going to do is use a white pigment ink. It needs to be a pigment ink, and I find the Hero Arts Unicorn Pigment ink the best. Now, because we're going to blend on top of it, I find that setting it with a bit of hairspray helps. I don't want to suck up too much of that color. I don't want to end up with a white ink pad that is multicolored. So I usually go ahead and spray a couple layers of hairspray on the top, and then it helps with the color not bleeding so much. Next up, I'm going to share with you 2 ways of kind of getting that bokeh technique going. You can either make your own stamps, or you can make your own stencil. Now you can use vellum, if that's all you've got in your stash, or you can use acetate. And acetate can be found on a lot of packaging. Sort of any kind of toys will have usually acetate on the front to share, what's in the packaging. Save that because you can use it for this technique. I've got hole punches and I've got dies, so you can use either of them for this technique as well. So if you've got punches, it's nice and easy, you're just going to punch out, and if you've got dies, we're going to just run it through the die cutting machine. Now, as you can see here, I'm just going to punch holes, and I want to space them out and get them as far into the stencil as I can, so I don't end up with a bit of a mess if I go outside of the edge of my little hole. You'll see what I mean in a second. You can also take some dies. These are ones from scrapbook.com. I do actually have some from CraftStash as well, which I do use later in the video because I find I don't get enough of a small circle with the scrapbook.com ones. Now I've got some fun foam, and this is how we're going to make our stamps. Now as you can see, my fun foam is way too thick to get through my hole punch. So a hole punch in this instance is not really usable unless you've got really thin foam, and then in that case you probably won't be able to stamp very easily. So I'm putting in my my CraftStash dies here and just getting a few more smaller dies. I'm going to run it through my die cut machine and only run it once. Don't go backward and forward. Just once, otherwise you will warp that foam like crazy. So you can either have your stencil on the left or some stamps on the right. I prefer the stencil, it works a lot easier and a lot nicer, but if all you've got is some punches and some foam, or your dies and some foam, you don't have anything that you can make a stencil out of, then by all means this will work. This is Repositionable Adhesive from scrapbook.com, and that's what I'm sticking on the back of my foam so that it sticks nice and easy. I'm going to grab a little finger dauber for my stencil. I just find it much easier to work with than a large ink blending brush or tool. This is just nice and easy for those little holes as well. I'm going to ink it up with the ink. Now, having done this several times, I've started with the big one here, and I did daub off some of the ink on the side. But your best bet when you're doing this technique is to start with your smallest holes first with your pure ink, and then move on to your bigger holes. So you want the lightest application of ink to be on your bigger images, your bigger shapes, and your darker, more saturated inks to be on the smaller shapes. So if you start with those smaller shapes first, you should be able to get through a whole entire card front on one daub of ink. And I did discover this as I was going, because I did find that it did still pick up the ink. I was still getting some of that transfer onto my ink dauber. However, if you do start with those small ones first and have those be your darkest ones, you can then actually get a nice saturated image and get that kind of bokeh look to it without having too much ink transfer. Now, if you've gone and made your own stamps using some fun foam, you can go ahead and do some stamping off and stamping on to get sort of different shades. However, I did find that my foam was nice and thin, which meant that I was getting some of that ink on the block, and the block was transferring onto the cardstock. So I do put my sentiment where that line is that you can see there on the card. In the end, I kind of try and cover it up slightly and a little bit cleverly, but that's the difference there. You get a very similar effect, but I do like the stencil a bit more, but you can do it with both of the options. Now, I did the exact same thing using my painted background, my gouache background. This time I got out my silicone mat and put it down just because it helped to hold that stencil a bit more. It wasn't wiggling around so much on me, and it was much easier to kind of ink up my background. So here you see the finished project, finished result of that one. But also, it doesn't need to be circles. So if you've only got a different shape, like maybe a hexagon or an octagon, then you can do the exact same thing with those shapes. I didn't bother to keep them all the same direction. I just did it every which way, die cut out my stencil, and you get a very similar effect, and it looks just as good. So use what you've got in your stash. Don't stress too much if you haven't got circles. Cleaning up is really easy. I've got a homemade spray. I've got a little video where you can check out how I made that homemade spray. I'll try and link it here in the video, or I'll put it down in the description box for you. I'm just going to spray down my finger dauber, daub off the excess liquid, and spray down my stencil and wipe it off, and then I've got a stencil ready to go, and I can move on to this one, which has no ink in it, so I have no ink transfer, and therefore I don't want to have a dirty ink dauber, so it's nice and easy. So I'm going to start this time, as I was saying before, with my smaller circles. I'm going to ink up those smaller circles first and then do the larger ones when my ink runs out. And I did go back in a little bit after I was all finished with those small circles just to kind of highlight those ones again if I put the big one over top of it. It'll make sense when you're doing it, I promise. But when you're finished, you get these gorgeous looking backgrounds. Make sure those backgrounds are fully dry before you go and start making some cards, because you will really struggle. That ink will transfer. It is a pigment ink, that white ink, and it will really stick and stay sticky, if that makes sense. Now I'm going to show you 6 different ways to make some cards out of these little panels, and I'm just sharing with you the products I'm using as I go, and hopefully I'll remember to stick them in the description box for you if you want to check them out. But what I did for this one was I created some fun circles. So I've got some different kinds of backgrounds to my circles. I've lined them all in black using different dyes to kind of add a bit of texture and dimension to them. And then I'm just going ahead and layering them up. So I've got my biggest one there, and I'm going to go ahead and use my bone folder from the back to make sure that glue is really spread around. I always use liquid glue so I can make sure I get it nice and central. I'm going to pick out a sentiment that fits that middle die cut, the nice cream colored die cut that I cut to add my sentiment onto my card. This is a Catherine Pooler set. It's a beautiful thank you set that kind of has every kind of thank you in it. I'm going to use my VersaFine Onyx Black, which in my opinion is the best black in the world. It's the best ever. It really is lovely and dark and pigmented every single time. And then I'm going to assemble my card. So I kind of wanted it sticking off my card a little bit, so I'm just sticking off to the edge there and sticking that one just a little bit off to the right edge, and then I'll add some foam to the back of my sentiment to kind of make that pop up a bit more. Now if you wanted to draw more attention to it and have more texture, you could go ahead and add in some twine or some metallic thread behind your sentiment, and that would make it stand out even more. I was kind of in a time pressure because it is Saturday night, and I am aware that my Saturday night crafting video is going to be later than 7, which is normal time for me, so I do apologize, but it has been a hectic little week. So to finish off my card, I'm adding on some of these flat back enamel dots, which are glittery, which are really fun, and I think I picked them up from AliExpress. If I can find the link for them, I'll stick it for you in the description box. Next I'm going to use this awesome new die set in my collection. It has got a whole bunch of houses, including one ginormous one. The packaging is A5 size, so you can get an idea of how big it is. It is from Pretty Gets Gritty. I don't know if you caught it. I'll put it down below for you. I'm going quite fast. I don't want to bore you too much. I want to share with you how I'm decorating these cards. Now, I do have a discount code for Pretty Gets Gritty, so if you want any of the explosion patterns, which I shared with you for this card, or any of these dies, I believe it is 10 or 15% off. It's down in the description box. You can check it out. You have a little code that you can put in when you check out. It'll give you a little discount, and she does ship worldwide, which is fun. So I've got my little houses cut out, and I cut out 2 hello dies, and I'm ready to stack those on top of each other. So again, I'm going to reinforce my glue from the back so I make sure I'm not smudging anything or smearing anything. And then I'm going to just stick down my houses using some liquid glue, and I'm going to do the 2 end ones first so that I can space them out nice and evenly. Otherwise I go totally wonky. So when those are all done and nice and even, I then attempt to put that hello in the middle of the card. I wanted something that stood out a bit from that very dark background. It's very pigmented and very dark, so I did it in a lighter color. However, I think I probably should have gone with maybe a blue, like a lighter blue. But anyways, I decided that I would outline it with my Arteza gel pen and just go around the edge of it, and that kind of helped to make that hello pop out a little bit more. So if you are in doubt and you think it blends too much, it doesn't look quite right, try outlining it with a pen and see if you like it a bit more. This is the one that we did with the stamps, if you remember, so it's got a bit of a bit of funny pattern on it. It wasn't as great as the stencils. For this one, I'm going to cut it into a little panel, and I'm going to place it in the middle of my card. I've got some colored cardstock which I picked up from Lidl in the UK. It's a German company, so if you're German, I apologize, it's Lidl. And it's a great shop. I think you can get it possibly in the States as well now. And they've got these great little card packs. I think they were about £2.50 for a whole big bundle of them, and you get 1 sheet of each color. So it's quite nice. It's got something in there for everyone. And I'm going to go ahead and stick a little panel down the middle of this card. Now this way you can get 2 cards out of that 1 panel. To finish it off, I put a little strip across it and then added a little popped up embellishment using that fun, beautiful die again that I used earlier on. For my next two cards, I'm going to cut down this piece of cardstock to some little panels, and I'm saving all those scraps because I can use those scraps for some more cards as well. Now this is a technique I've done ages ago, and I thought this would be perfect for a little panel to kind of make you stretch out your backgrounds and make more cards. We're going to take our little panel, use that removable adhesive again, place our panel where we want it on the front of our card, place our stamp onto our card front wherever we want it to be. We're going to use a stamp platform. This is the easiest way to do this technique. I'm afraid you can't do it without a stamp platform. We go ahead and stamp down that image. You can see it's not stamping beautiful around the edge, and that does not matter because we are not going to move the card base. We are just going to lift off that panel when we're all finished, put it to the side to dry because it again is a pigment ink, and then we're going to stamp the background. Now we've got a beautiful flat image and an image that will go over top of it that will match and line up perfectly. I did another one with this Jane Gill set, which is brand new from Woodware, and I love it. She's got a whole bunch of them. I shared with you a few weeks ago. I'm totally addicted to these stamps. They're gorgeous. I think also a nice singular stamp, a nice simple singular stamp would work really well. But again, black is lovely. It kind of makes that image pop off. You could line your little panel with a bit of black as well, which would make it pop up a bit more. I was running out of time, but no ideas. As you can tell, I had so many ideas. You do have to be careful. This ink does stay wet for a bit longer. But when you're all finished, you can go ahead and glue on those panels. If you use liquid glue, you can slide it right into place. And then you get this gorgeous image. You can finish it off with a little sentiment strip. And that's all you need to do. You could add a little bit of bling if you wanted, and it would work really well. My next card, I'm going to do a die cut as sort of my focal point. So I'm using this Crazy Daisy from Pretty Gets Gritty. Again, this is the one that I've got a discount code for you. And all I did was I took that designer paper that I had put the bokeh effect on, put that die cut right over the top, and added a sentiment. So that's 6 cards for you with all different kinds of ideas. Hopefully you've got something in your stash that you can use to make it work, and you can have a lovely, enjoyable night. So I apologize it's a longer one, but I had loads of ideas to share with you, and I really could have kept going. But I hope you have a fabulous weekend, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Take care. Bye for now.